This is Hub City Spokes, where creators, catalysts, and leaders share their insight in Lubbock, Texas. This season, we're speaking with local businesses discussing their response to these changing times. Thanks for joining us. For those of you listening, you probably can't tell, but we're sitting up a little straighter and we've got our game face on because the boss man for this podcast is here, LEDA CEO John Osborne. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Are you just so excited? I know you've just been waiting for this moment.
I am. I kept asking, where's the audience, though? And you said, no, this is all virtual. They'll see it later. And so I'm learning more and more about these things.
I'll send you the link so you can share it.
Thanks.
So we're talking with other businesses, local businesses, about their response to COVID. And a part of LEDA and Market Lubbock's approach to this time was to partnership with Spag to give out this fund, essentially a $2 million fund. Do you want to tell some people about that?
Yeah. I mean, I want to even back up just a few weeks before that, almost a month before that time period. We were following and visiting with our local companies. We were making phone calls to companies that we had relationships with. We were making calls to companies we'd never met before or didn't have a strong relationship with. We reached out to all industries. It didn't matter if it was retail, office space, manufacturing, tourism. We were trying to just get a pulse for how the stay-at-home order was affecting them. Many of the companies early on said, we're just trying to get to a certain date when the stay-at-home order is supposed to be done, and then it got extended. Others talked about the fact that the businesses had been impacted dramatically as a result of not being able to have customers come in or not being able to have their employees be there. We heard many of the real challenging situations, and there was a lot of companies that were managing just fine. But we did hear about companies that were just experiencing a lot of difficulties, and we just decided at one point that there needed to be additional assistance. In reality, it kind of came right after the SBA had made their announcement about helping to try to fund with their PPP program. And one of the big challenges for it was that we heard from the Chamber of Commerce that many of our local companies did not get in while there were still funds available. We heard some of the challenges as it relates to companies that were trying to get in early on some of those loans and grants, that the process kept changing for them. And we just heard about these difficulties, and we finally decided that we needed to do something to help our local companies. The best way that we could as a community come out in the long term experiencing better economic conditions is if our companies are able to remain in business. If they're remaining in business, that means that there's jobs that people can have. That means that there's an opportunity for them to grow. It's much easier to keep a company in business than it is to start up a new one. And we just found that if there was some kind of program we could put together that would enable during this challenging time to bridge that challenge and to get to where the end of the tunnel was, where the light was, we needed to try to do that. And I think the Support Lubbock Fund did it.
Yeah, so the federal loans, they can be quite extensive to apply for one of those. Like you typically almost would need an accountant to help you get through those, right? Yeah,
a lot of those, they were going through the banks. And so the bankers were working. We were hearing about bankers that were working 24/7, that the banks themselves were having some of their loan officers actually come in at different times so that they could stagger it, so they could be socially distant, but also so that they could have an opportunity to touch as many businesses as possible. And we were hearing banks that were doing 400 loans in a matter of a week, and that's just an incredible amount. So we knew that there was a lot of companies that were trying to go through that process, but anytime you're dealing with the federal government, there's just a lot of challenges, and there was the money ended up being gone from the federal government prior to everybody being able to access it.
So when you created this fund, what are some of the things you took into consideration in establishing parameters around the qualities of a business or the factors that might be considered to grant a business funds?
We're used to granting dollars. We're not really used to loaning out money. Economic development organizations are set up differently across not just Texas, but across the entire United States. And some are really good at loaning out money. They have revolving loan funds that they administer themselves, but we're not in that same situation. We also recognize that over the last 30 years or so, that of even almost 40 years that we've been able to do economic development in Texas, that any time there's a grant program that's established, the line to get those grant funds is tremendously long. And we also saw and have experienced where not every one of those businesses necessarily needed the grant funds, but if it's available, why not go after it? So one of the big challenges that we had was trying to design a program that would make sure that the money that we put into the program would hit those that were most affected and most in need of the funds. And that's how the Support Lubbock Fund came up and got established, and it started to enable us to put some of the parameters in place that made it what it is, and we think has been a hugely successful program.
Were there certain limits to the amount that a business might apply for, or like you mentioned, encouraging people that maybe if you don't need the fund, don't apply for the fund?
Yeah, we actually even said that in our press release, and I was on a couple of different Zoom meetings with a lot of business people where we basically said, listen, this fund is not just to give you money. This is if you need it and you truly need it, we want you applying for it. But if you don't need it, don't apply for it, because we want to make sure it's there for those that are really truly in need. And I think if as you've talked to Kelly and Naomi, that you probably heard that the businesses routinely responded back to Spag, basically saying, this is so helpful. We really, really, truly needed this. We actually established kind of a tiered system based on your gross revenues, not your net revenues, your gross revenues. So we're not talking about profit. We're just talking about how much money is the company making in total revenues. And that could be through grants. It could be through selling things. We didn't limit what those revenues were. We just said, based on your gross revenues from your most recent tax period, if you fell in one of three categories, then you had the opportunity to access the amount of dollars in each of those systems. Of the not quite 60 different applicants 60 different companies that we funded, I think there was only 2 that didn't ask for the entire amount that they were eligible for. So what that says to me is that there's a tremendous need amongst our business community, and they needed everything they could possibly get access to. We ended up having requests for the full $2 million within 48 hours. And we cut off applicants receiving applications by the following. That was on a Friday. By the following Monday, we'd stopped receiving. We stopped being willing to take applications. And when it was all said and done, there was an additional request for $700,000 greater than what we were able to fund. And so we know that there's still a need out there. We recognize that businesses are still hurting, very much so. And I can't imagine that if we just allowed this to keep rolling through the next month, what the request would look like. I really wish we had just millions more that we could contribute to this type of program to really help out our business community.
For other cities that are obviously in similar situations, as we all are, what would you say about the transferability of this fund, this type of fund, for someone who's maybe doing economic development in a smaller town in Texas, or perhaps even, as large as Lubbock? Well,
we've seen a lot of our peers have established funds. They've just been grant funds, and one of their negatives has been that immediately the funds ran out because so many companies stepped up to the plate to take those, and they didn't necessarily go to those that were kind of most in need. And that's one of the beauty of parts of our program, is that we've actually established it as a loan program that's basically at market rates or even a little worse, because we didn't want to encourage companies to step up that didn't need it. But yet, if you're if your gross revenues fall by a certain percentage between 2019 and 2020, as we measure it at the end of the first quarter in 2021, sometime here in the future, then there a portion of, or possibly the entire amount of your loan could be converted to a grant. And I fully expect that the bulk of our loan funds end up getting converted because I think the businesses are hurting that badly.
So whenever this idea first came to you within your team, what was your first thought?
Well, we originally, when COVID kind of first hit and stay-at-home orders took place, I had some initial conversations with our CFO, COO, Jana Johnston. I had some conversations with the executive director of the Texas Economic Development Council, which is an association of economic development corporations here in Texas. Had some conversations with some of my CEO peers and some other cities, and just talked about the fact that we needed to see first how the SBA responded. That the SBA has an infinite amount more money than any of us do as a local community organization. We needed to see how that was deployed. We needed to see where the missed spots were. We needed to see what the challenges were as it related to it. And at the same time, my sales team on both LEDA and Visit Lubbock were constantly visiting with our local companies and just hearing about the significant challenges that they were experiencing, and the loss of revenue, the furloughed jobs. Some of the companies actually were hiring, and this was a time that they needed more output, and they were trying to find access to people, and so we were helping to connect people that way with potential jobs as well. But in reality, as we got more than a month into this, we realized that the SBA had helped a lot of companies, but there were still a lot of companies that didn't get the help that they needed, and so we saw this is the time that we need to deploy this, and I think it was in a matter of less than 2 weeks, maybe 10 days, that we started. Really evaluating not only the need for a program, but what would a program look like, and then not only that, but advertise for a board meeting, call a board meeting, advertise for the board meeting, and actually establish the fund. And it came together so nicely, so quickly, and it's because of our partners and how quickly they all stepped up. Our team members really provided a lot of great input as to things that needed to be adjusted so that we could hopefully maximize the number of companies that we assisted, and also to ensure that those companies that we assisted had the best chance of survival as a result of the funds. And because that was, again, trying to bridge this tough time is really what the goal of the program was, so that hopefully we have companies in place in the future to employ people.
Yeah, it seemed like a big focus of it was making sure that everyone knew about the fund, and that it was important for our entire Lubbock community to be aware of this and to know that that there are people that are trying to bridge that gap, like you said.
Yeah, but it all came together with the approval at City Council. That's when we started really advertising it. We really didn't actually talk about it to any of our companies beforehand. We floated the idea by a few of them that we said, hey, what if we did this? Would that be helpful? And many of them said yes, but we didn't say when it was going to be ready or any of that. It was our board met on a Tuesday at lunch and approved the program. We took it to the city council the next morning. I want to say it was by 10 o'clock, and we were done with that meeting. They called a special called meeting just for our agenda item. And then we were done by 11. I was on 2 Zoom calls, basically one later that afternoon and another the next day, in which the Chamber of Commerce had done a blast email. We sent out a press release. We put it on social media. We just tried to get the word out as much as we could on that on that Wednesday of the council meeting, to let people know that there was an opportunity here. And interestingly, if you look at the long list of companies that we assisted, there's not a list of companies that we're used to working with. This really obviously hit those companies that were in significant need. We made the maximum tier, if you want to call it that, be for $5 million in gross revenues. And most of the companies that we work with on a daily basis average a lot more than that. And so this was really meant to help our true small businesses in our community.
Yeah, that was one thing that really surprised me. I think it's the SBA perhaps that recognizes a business with 500 or less as a small business.
Yeah.
That doesn't, I mean, I wouldn't even think for any city in Texas or the country for that matter, 500 employees does not seem like a small business to me.
Yeah, and while we focused ours on gross revenues, we didn't focus it on the number of jobs because, like you said, the SBA looks at the number of employees, and 500 or less is considered a small business. Well, that's all but, I don't know, a dozen different companies that we have here in town. Most of what Lubbock is made up of is small businesses. The mayor often talks about the fact that we have so many entrepreneurs here that have started small businesses, and we've one of the reasons we have such a great economy here is because we have a true diversity of companies, and so that if any of them were to start to lay off people, they can only lay off a few because there's not just massive amounts of people employed at any one company. And so that's why we looked more at the gross revenue side versus the total number of jobs. Again, economic activity will help breed more economic activity. It also provides an opportunity for someone to be employed and to work. And we felt like by helping those companies out that were of decent size and had been in business for a couple of years, there was the best chance of this money would give them the best chance of survival. And it would then not only would it help that company remain in business, it would enable people to continue with their jobs. So then we helped our families too, because they continued to receive a paycheck during this time period as well. So we felt like it was maybe not the most perfect system, but is as close to perfect as we could develop, especially in such a short time period, and get it deployed as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Judging from what Kelly and Naomi were mentioning with the businesses that were benefited and how quickly they received the funds, I mean, it's commendable what you and your team did, and the partnership with the council and everything kind of just coming together to help in a time of need. Yeah,
a lot of times the revolving loan fund, and Spag talks about this, they manage a number of different revolving loan funds, and it takes 45 days to close a loan at a bare minimum. And all of us, including our people at Spag that helped us on this project, said 45 days, that if we wait that long, a lot of these companies are going to be out of business. We need to try to deploy this as quickly as possible. Even our Underwood law firm that helped us close the loans assisted us by just doing all those projects all right then, because we knew it was needed. Many of the funds at People's Bank, they wired those funds without any charges to it when they found out what we were doing, because they knew.
Yeah, it was making an impact, definitely. Well, this is exciting. It's exciting for the future of Lubbock to have people that are so invested in the community and not only bringing growth here, but also supporting the local community. Speaking of the future of Lubbock, our podcast is being hosted in the Doubletree in downtown Lubbock. It's a beautiful hotel.
Oh, they've done a great job.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait. It's supposed to be opening by the end of the year, I believe, with Chef Tony cooking up stuff for the restaurant and the conferences that'll be hosted and whatnot, and the bar and everything. We've seen some of the cocktails he's made, y'all, and they are something to look forward to. So we're excited. We're excited about all that's coming, and hopefully I can get you back on the podcast. John, for those of you who don't know, he's the chairman for Ports to Plains. He's also very involved in economic development throughout the state. So I've got plenty I can talk to you about. So maybe I can get back on your schedule again.
You might wait and see how many viewers you get on this one, and if they fall off when you get to my segment, because I know they'll show up for Kelly and Naomi. I'm sure they did a great job. No, I'm good. Yeah. By the way, if you heard any doors closing behind in the scenes and whatnot, the hotel is being renovated. So that's just a little FYI. That was not missed in editing. So, and actually, we usually would speak with everyone together, all three of them interviewed, but we're social distancing right now because of what's going on. So again, we appreciate your time, and we'll catch you guys next time. Hub City Spokes is produced by the Lubbock Economic Development Alliance in partnership with Hamel Bros Studios. Special thanks to the Doubletree by Hilton for hosting us here in downtown Lubbock. For more episodes and to subscribe, go to lubbockeda.org/podcast.